1896, Dayton, Ohio. Wilbur and Orville Wright built and sold bikes, but were also known for being incredibly helpful around the town.
If you'd lived next to the Wright brothers in Dayton in 1896, 1897, you would have thought of them as great guys, honest as the day is long, but you never would have picked them out as two people who were going to change the world with the invention of the airplane.
Neither of them finished high school, but both had a talent for understanding mechanics, especially mechanical things such as bicycles, highly popular in 1896. But bikes were not the only new contraptions gaining attention. Around the world, inventors were trying to build and fly gliders. The most famous was Otto Lilienthal of Germany. He had attempted more than 2,000 flights, but in 1896 he crashed and died, which made headlines as far away as Ohio.
You can almost see the light bulb go off over Wilbur Wright's head. And he said later, it was at that moment that he began to think to himself, well, you know, the great Lilienthal is dead. Maybe we can pick up that gauntlet and push this thing forward a little farther. And I think it's at that moment in 1896, again, that the spark catches and the light bulb goes off, and Wilbur Wright and then Orville Wright begin to think seriously about flying machine experiments.
Wilbur and Orville believed it was sensible to follow Lilienthal's idea of trying to control a glider before trying to build a plane with a motor. And the two brothers already knew how to control motion from their work with bicycles.
If you think about a bicycle, you have to lean into a turn with a bicycle. And that gave them a conceptual notion of how complicated it was going to be to turn an airplane.
They also worked out that to fly a plane, control was vital on 3 separate axes. Nose up or nose down, known as pitch, nose right or nose left, also called yaw, and the third axis, wing up or wing down, or lateral movement.
The tough one was, how do you control an airplane like this?
Birds were obvious master of that difficult lateral movement, banking effortlessly on currents of air. The Wright brothers noticed birds change the angle of their wingtips to create lateral motion, known as wing warping. But how could the brothers build wing warping into a machine? An incident at their bike shop provided the critical clue.
Can I purchase a bicycle inner tube, please?
That'll be 2 cents.
The long, narrow box reminded Orville of wings. All he had to do was to find a way to build a glider with wings that twisted one way or the other.
The breakthrough idea was the notion that by changing the geometry of the wing, by twisting it, you could increase or decrease the lift on either side of the wing, and that meant you could balance the wing.
Orville had just discovered how to adapt the concept of wing warping for human use. The brothers experimented for the next 2 years. They started with a small box kite on ropes and worked up to a full-scale glider, big enough to carry a man. In the summer of 1901, they needed a location to test it.
They knew that they needed to fly into strong, steady winds to increase the lift of their wings. And they wrote to the Weather Bureau, which sent them a list of the windiest places in the country.
Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, had the correct type of wind. It also had sand dunes high enough to launch their glider.
Wilbur writes a letter. He gets a letter back from sort of the leading citizen of Kitty Hawk, saying, yeah, strong, steady winds, dunes to fly from, and if you come down, I can promise you friendly folk who will give you a hand. And that was enough for Wilbur Wright. He was on his way to Kitty Hawk.
Orville posed with their strange-looking invention, nose pointing upward with huge wings and no tail. First, they tested it without a pilot, checking the wing warping using control ropes from the ground. The results were encouraging. Then Wilbur, the eldest brother, prepared to test it in the air.
What you have to remember is that what these guys are doing is inherently dangerous. This not only took intellectual brilliance, but it took real physical courage.
Wilbur launched himself into the unknown and reached an altitude of 122 meters.
And it turns out to be just an extraordinarily frightening experience.
But Wilbur was almost killed because the glider tended to spin out of control.
The machine would do all sorts of squirrely things. You would be flying along, you'd be struck by a gust, you would increase, you'd warp the wings, and instead of coming back to normal, you would begin to get control reversely.
They thought they had solved the wing warping problem, but they hadn't.
They had gone into this determined that they would understand control first and foremost, and now there was a problem that they hadn't expected.
There was also a second major problem. Their prototype wasn't obtaining nearly enough lift.
And they actually talked about stopping, about quitting.
Man will never fly, not in our lifetime.
In the autumn of 1901, it seemed as if the Wright brothers' bold experiment would just be another footnote in the history of flight.
Sometimes, when they warped one side of the wing up, instead of increasing the lift and restoring balance, the increase in the drag would cause the airplane to come back like this. And so you'd be going into a spin, as it were.
Their test flights had led to one important discovery. Lateral movement must be controlled simultaneously with left-to-right motion, or yaw.
And what they discovered was that if you link the wing warping with the rudder so that when you warp the wing, this happens, then you really do balance it, and the wing warping works.
To solve the problem, they designed a different type of rudder. Instead of the original fixed rudder, the next would be movable, so when wing warping put the plane into a spin, it would compensate. They had worked out the control issue, but they still had to solve their lift problem. The wing design data the brothers had been using was the same as the German Otto Lilienthal. They reassessed and believed he had miscalculated when designing the shape of his wings. So, they built a wind tunnel to calculate their own data.
It was a wooden box about 6 feet long with a fan on one end. The ingenious part, the brilliant part, was the balance that went inside the wind tunnel. It was made out of hacksaw blades and bicycle wire, and you pin these little model wings onto it. This is a thing that you can hold in the palm of your hand, and yet, when you run wind over the model wing that's mounted on the balance, a little needle at the bottom of the balance pops out the number that you need to calculate the coefficient of lift or drag.
They spent months testing 200 different wing shapes to determine which shape would provide the best lift. Their tests revealed that making the wing thicker at the front so it tapered like a teardrop at the back decreased air pressure above the wing and increased pressure below the wing, a design that maximized lift.
And it's when you see how they've done that kind of thing that you begin to realize that these are no ordinary lucky bicycle mechanics. These guys are engineers of genius who have a clarity of vision that's extraordinary.
In the summer of 1902, the Wright brothers went back to Kitty Hawk, keen to test their new improved glider.
Well, the brothers must have been apprehensive. They knew that the airplane was in fact very difficult to control, and that what they were doing was really tough.
But the latest glider worked magnificently. It had great lift, and the wing warping, along with the new movable rudder, worked superbly.
1902 is a wonderful year for them, because now everything's in place. They can make glide after glide after glide after glide. They are in pretty much control of the airplane now, the glider, and they know that this is it. They have now moved beyond anybody else.
The following year, they went further. The brothers unveiled the Flyer, a motorized version of their glider. They had added a petrol engine built in their bike shop and wooden propellers they had designed and carved. It was December the 17th, 1903. A small crowd gathered on the dunes at Kitty Hawk. Orville clambered aboard as the spectators held their breath. The first motorized flight lasted only 12 seconds, but it was enough to change history. Wilbur ran ecstatically alongside.
It's not all that often when a really important first, a real breakthrough takes place, and we have an image of that moment. That picture shows you the very first time in the history of the world that a powered, controlled airplane is leaving the ground in full flight. And there it is for you to see. It's that picture of the beginning.
The brothers flew 3 further flights, achieving a whole minute in the air.
After December 17th, what you heard people say was, wow, if human beings can do that, can actually build a machine that'll take off and fly into the sky, what can't we do? I mean, it sort of opened the doors of possibility on the 20th century.
The Wright brothers soared to celebrity status because they had successfully built the world's first flying machine.